Assalamu alaikum, brothers, sisters, and friends. I hope you're well. So, welcome to another episode of the GDM show. And as promised, we're going to be doing an episode on Richard Dawkins and his recent tweets regarding aborting babies with Down syndrome. We're joined by Brother Sabur. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Sabur. How are you? You good? Good. So, let's take you away. What are your thoughts? And let's break down what's basically happened.
Sure. I mean, the first thing is what he actually said. He said something along the lines of, abort it, try again, it would be immoral to bring it into the world, it as in the fetus or the baby. So the thing is, a lot of people might look at this and think, okay, this guy has completely lost it, right? He's acting like a crazed madman. I mean, if you look into, if I was just to go to any normal person in the street and say, you know, there's this guy, and he actually wants to, he believes that children with Down syndrome or babies with Down syndrome should be aborted and stuff like this. People, you get shocked. People would be thinking this guy's mad. But because it's Richard Dawkins, people are like, oh, he's a biologist. Oh, maybe he has a point here. Oh, he's an academic. And it really shows how human beings can sometimes act really, really stupid because there's somebody in authority, somebody with a bit of a status, a bit of a following. So when he says something which is so incredibly crazy and it's you know inhumane, people take it seriously.
Yeah. And
I mean, what he says, I would say for the atheists who are saying we don't agree with him, you know, he's lost it, he doesn't represent us. There's this whole discussion amongst atheists about whether Richard Dawkins is a liability or an asset. I would say, well, actually, according to your worldview, he is entitled to that viewpoint. And also, if you just use his logic is basically it, as in the baby, the fetus, has no benefit for the world. So bringing it into the world would be immoral, according to him. Using that same logic, you could make the argument that if a baby is born and you discover it has Down syndrome, then you can also kill the baby at that point.
Yeah.
I mean, now somebody might come across and say, no, we disagree, but hang on, what's the difference between it being inside the womb and 1 hour after delivery it's outside of the womb?
Yep.
I mean, why do people like Richard Dawkins and his, you know, atheist minions, why do they seem to think that they can have their cake and eat it, that they can talk about morality, they can talk about how religions are immoral, and how atheism, when it takes over the world, you're going to have bunnies and rainbows and cats playing with mouses and all this sort of stuff, when in reality their worldview calls for something a lot more sinister.
Yeah, it's crazy. And I see the point that you're making. The first thing we need to understand is, number one, what he said is crazy, it's pathetic, it's ridiculous. Atheists and theists alike have been outraged by this nonsense that he's
but atheists don't have a right to be outraged.
Of course, but they have been. And we're going to discuss this, why they're not. And this is the second point you made, is that what are your foundations for passing moral judgments, deciphering between right and wrong, good and bad, right? This is what it boils down to. Like you said, he, on his worldview, is justified in doing saying what he said. He could have gone out and said much worse, right? But on his worldview, it's fine. Because one thing we need to realize, and this maybe come across as crude, is that what atheism is effectively teaching is that there is no accountability, there is no God, anything goes, right? And
anything that benefits you goes.
Yeah, well, some go to that level, right? Some say, okay, here is our loose criteria. We're going to give ourselves the criteria because people are starting to realize what's actually going on. Anything goes. The reality is anything goes. Because, like you said, it's all subjective.
I mean, yeah, exactly. And how different is this to, say, Hitler, right? Or Stalin or Lenin or these guys? When they went out there, again, they were all atheists. When they went out there and they committed these mass murder of millions of people.
Yep.
And some of the arguments that they gave for this mass murder is very similar to the sort of argument that he's making. So Hitler, I mean, the Nazis, they killed disabled people, they killed people who they deemed inferior, and that's exactly what he's doing. It would be immoral to bring it into the world, right? So someone may look at this and think, oh, it's a harmless point of view, he's entitled to his point of view, but this along the line leads to people dying.
Yeah.
So it is a very serious
It wasn't only a
topic.
point of view, it was also a recommendation, because the tweet he made was a response to a lady inquiring about this,
Oh, yeah,
right?
that's true, yeah.
So that's another, it's a problem in itself. And this is the problem, and I pointed this out in the initial video I made, was that on atheism, according to consequentialism, if you follow consequentialism, which basically means if the consequences are good, then carry the action out, it's good. But if the consequences are bad or lead to suffering or evil, then don't do it. But this loose criteria itself, you can justify some crazy things under this criteria, as we're seeing being done already, right? Now, the problem is, people see this, and people see someone like Richard Dawkins, who's held up as a public figure, and they will follow him. And this could be dangerous because, like we said, anything really goes under, even under such loose criteria as
The
consequentialism.
thing is, look, how do you even define good and evil under atheism?
There is no objective
You can't.
values.
And the thing is, it's really strange that Richard Dawkins in his book, all his books, I mean, we're going to speak about the magical reality in a second, but the God delusion and the blind watchmaker and most of his books, right? He will use morally loaded terms, good, bad, beneficial, all this sort of stuff. But in reality, under atheism, there is no objective good or objective evil. It's all purely subjective.
Yep.
And even in his own book, The God Delusion, it's quite strange. Even though he speaks about good and bad and how religion's bad, there's actually a part of his book in which it says there is no good, there is no evil. It's just blind, pitiless indifference, right? And it's really shocking that he holds a very self-contradictory view, but he's so blind to it.
Yeah.
I mean, he speaks so adamantly about human rights and this and that and good and bad.
Yeah.
At the same time, there is no foundation to it.
Yeah, it's almost like this happens. You deny God, you deny Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, and you end up in this conundrum because, on one hand, your innate self shouts out wanting to try and do good and distinguish between good and bad and advise towards good and not towards evil. But at the same time, on atheism, none of this really matters. If you claim atheism, nothing matters. You, me, we're just a rearrangement of molecules and atoms. It doesn't matter.
If you're matter, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, if you matter, then it doesn't really matter. If someone came and started torturing me, it shouldn't really matter.
And you know, I just want to challenge Richard Dawkins on this, right? In his book, The Magical Reality, he goes through a whole, history of different cultures and all these various different things that they did, which he finds bizarre, which some of them were very bizarre, sacrificing children, all this crazy stuff that's happened throughout history, right? And he sort of gives this, I think it's very interesting insight into how human beings can do some really fundamentally irrational things. Every single one of these things in his book that he speaks about, child sacrifice and all the rest of the stuff that's in there, each one of these things, the people that did them, according to his worldview, were they objectively wrong in doing those
No.
things? Were they objectively wrong in sacrificing children?
Not according to his
him?
worldview, no. Because according to his worldview, there is no objective right or wrong. There's no absolutes, basically.
And I, as a Muslim, I can say, Allah says in the Quran, whoever saves a life is as if they saved the life of all of mankind.
Yeah.
And whoever takes a life is as if they've taken the lives of all of mankind. Now, even if we didn't have revelation, we as human beings know that murder is wrong. We
Yes.
as human beings know that being good to our parents is good. We as human beings know that stealing is wrong, helping the poor is good, right? But what he wants to do is he wants to take these moral teachings from religion,
Yeah, it's borrowed,
Right?
basically.
borrow it,
Yeah.
and speak about these things. And at the same time, he has absolutely no right to do so. But what I really want to speak about next is this whole concept of once atheism is, all over the world, and you have humanism and you have secularism, he believes it's going to be more of a peaceful place. History has shown that's not been the case at all.
Yes. Yes, that's very true. That's another problem in itself. I mean, maybe you want to cite some examples so the people know exactly what we're talking about.
You look at the last 100 years. If you look at religious, crazy religious people and the acts that they do, the terrorist acts that
Put them
they
all
do,
together.
yeah, you'll have thousands of people that have done.
Yeah, and we're not
right?
saying they're right in any way, shape, or form.
Of course.
But we're just playing the numbers game. If you like,
playing
right
the
now.
numbers game, right? So you have thousands of human beings that have died, and
Yeah.
that's a terrible thing.
Yes.
That's not something that can be condoned in any shape or form.
Yep.
But if you look at the atheists over the last 100 years, they have killed at least 80 million people. Some estimates are
These
200
are
million people.
conservative figures,
Yeah.
and you're being
And now they may say, "Oh, I know what you're speaking about. You're speaking about Stalin and Lenin and
Chairman
Pol
Mao.
Pot and Chairman Mao who killed millions of people." No, they weren't atheists. They were communists. Hang on a second. Every atheist may not be a communist, but
Yes.
every communist dictator
Yep.
was an atheist, and according to them, there was no accountability.
Yep.
They suppressed religious freedom. They suppressed the rights of people to practice their religion, and many, many things that these atheists did. I mean, even today, you'll find atheist governments
Yep.
imposing their atheism upon mass populations.
Yes.
And you know what? We know these are their true colors. They can go out there and talk about human rights and speak about, we're here, atheist makes us all more human. You know that song from John Lennon, Imagine no religion, no heaven above us, only sky, and how the world is going to be a peaceful place. In reality, we know they have no foundation for morality.
Yep.
Their history has been full of blood.
Yep.
And even the future, if you look at it, people like Sam Harris, people like Christopher Hitchens, right? We can see through the works of these people that these people, if they had power, they would do exactly what Stalin did, exactly what Lenin did, exactly what Chairman Mao did. Now, these, the atheist minions which are on Facebook and YouTube and these guys who are always commenting on it, they say, no, that's not true. Well, do you know what? Go pick up the book, The End of Faith by Sam Harris. What does he say? He calls for a nuclear strike on Mecca, on the Muslim world, and for a preemptive one at that, right? And you have people like Christopher Hitchens, who was a chief promoter of the Iraq War,
Yeah.
which cost the lives of 1 million Iraqi Muslims. So these guys have absolutely no right to speak about anything regarding morality.
Yeah.
And I would simply say this: all these guys that follow them and that see these guys as superheroes, see these guys as some sort of higher beings that they need to follow, I would say stop for a second. Be what you claim to be, which is free thinkers. Be what you claim to be, which is rationalists. Stop for a second, look at them, right? Look at what they're saying and ask yourselves, are these people talking sense?
Yep. And I guess to conclude, one thing that came to mind when you were saying these things is that an atheist philosopher once said that if there is no God, then the best way to live is a selfish life, because that's what makes sense, right? Naturally. And this is what we see happening. Deny God, you're open to fulfill your desires, you're open to live as you want, do what you want, and that's going to be a selfish existence anyway. And this is the sad reality, because if you remove God from the picture, human beings are destructive. And in the aim and goal to fulfill and satisfy themselves in a selfish way, you would cause destruction to people. All of these things about being selfless and caring for others and worrying about human life and this, that, and the other on, naturalism or atheism doesn't make sense in one small bit, right? And that's the sad reality. In the absence of God, like we said, we just matter. And if that's the case, then nothing really matters. We don't really matter. And in that scenario, in that context, anything could really be justified, right?
Yeah.
And this is the scary reality that we could potentially face if people don't wake up and see this reality. Because on the other hand, what's being demonized and what's being misrepresented, which is Islam, is actually the truth, which can actually free people, not only from subjective ideas of what right and wrong is, but also from fulfilling and satisfying their own desires, and to actually start caring for other people and human beings. Maybe to some degree, as Muslims, we've fallen short in not showing what Islam is to the world. But nevertheless, don't judge Islam based on us, you or me or other Muslims. Go and study the text for yourself. Don't go by what Dawkins is saying and so on and so forth.
Obviously, we also need to be realistic, and adding on to that there's definitely Muslims out there who do terrible things.
Yeah.
And there's, if you imagine there's these terrible things which Muslims do, but if you look at the whole number of Muslims around the world, which is approximately a quarter of the population, you'll find out that these violent extremists that do these things are an extreme minority.
Yes.
Right? and they are so small, they might be, you know, magnified by the media, but the vast, vast, vast majority of Muslims are peaceful. And in terms of our own foundational teachings, it teaches to value life. It teaches to value the human being. It teaches to value even people that want to kill you. In Islam, Islam is a religion of mercy, right? It's not a religion which is there just to, you know, force people into submission or any of these sort of things. But anyway, that's a side point we can talk about.
We can discuss that in another video. Definitely, that'd be really beneficial. Hopefully, what we discussed today would really benefit the people watching the show. And I guess what we're trying to tell people is to just wake up and smell the coffee, right? Let's wake up to the reality, look past the smoke screen, the lies and distortions, and wake up to the truth. And the reality is, we as human beings, we're not just atoms, we're something far greater than this. And through Islam, through realizing the reality of God and His revelation, we wake up to the truth that we're more than this. We were created by God, we were created to serve human beings, help human beings, take care of ourselves, and try to achieve something good for the eternity that's to come. So look beyond these petty things, look beyond your petty desires. Because sometimes the case is, just to conclude, that just in the aim to fulfill our desires, we deny the Creator. We'll do anything just so we can carry on living the way we want to live. But look past this, and what you realize is the reality is far more beautiful. And just we want people to wake up, I guess. Jazakallah khair, brothers, for coming. I thank you, thank the people for listening. Make sure you tune in to the next show. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.